like to welcome you to the second PEGS Town Hall, and really to let you know that we really are continuing to want to let those of you who are interested know what's going on, what kind of things are happening, and some of the results that we've begun to find from our PEGS study. I'm Jan Hall, and I'm a co-principal investigator with Allison Motsinger-Reif, who is also, who you also see here. And could I have the next slide? I want to really start by talking about what the environment is. It's kind of amazing, but we get asked this question all the time. And in fact, the environment, or what we're exposed to, is really everything, and it's across time. And it affects our lives in major ways. So let's just think of a few of the things. If you look down at the bottom in the dark blue, you'll see things like temperature and humidity and odor and noise and plastics and occupational exposures. And those are those external factors that a lot of people think about as only that's what the environment is. But in the green, we also know that social things affect our environment. What's our household income? What about inequality? What about social capital? What about cultural norms? What about stress? We also know that the ecosystems that we live in and that surround us are an incredibly important part of how our bodies respond and how we respond. And those include food outlets, alcohol, built environment, meaning, all the buildings that are around us and the way the buildings are made, land use in an urban area, population density, and one of the really important things that we know is that green space has really positive effects. And finally, there are things that we often think about as lifestyle factors: physical activity, sleep behavior, diet, smoking, and drug and alcohol use. So these things are all really important parts of our environment, and that's being increasingly understood. Together, these now are called the exposome, and the exposome can be measured in multiple ways. We have used a lot of questionnaire data, and that questionnaire data has given us information about a lot of the things that we're going to see in a few minutes. We've also used addresses to augment that. And I think those things are incredibly important. Next slide.
So here I'll talk about, thanks Jan for that wonderful introduction to exposomics, and we'll talk a little bit more detail about the amazing data that you all have helped provide to help us understand how the exposome impacts health. So I'll talk here briefly about sort of the data types that we've collected, and can go into more detail the further we get into the presentation. So our first way we have assessed the exposome, as Jan mentioned, was through survey data. So we have 3 surveys, health and exposure, and 2 exposomics surveys that we have information from over 9,400 PEGS participants that's been collected. So this information includes things like general demographics, your age, your sex at birth, etc., family medical history, a lot of lifestyle factors, occupational and residential exposures, and as Jan mentioned, addresses and address history. And then we have the wonderful opportunity to also incorporate genetic data for about 4,700 of the participants that have also provided exposomic data through the surveys. So we've collected whole genome sequencing for about 4,700 participants. So we can start thinking about genetic factors that underlie risk, as well as, very importantly, gene environment interactions that we know are an important part of health outcomes. Next slide. So some snapshots from those surveys. So the first survey, as I mentioned, is the health and exposure survey. That's where we've asked questions about, has a doctor ever diagnosed you with A, B, or C? And then have you been exposed to X, Y, and Z in your lifestyle or occupationally? We've got some snapshots here of the prevalences of some of those common complex traits that you guys have provided information on, whether it's been, have you been diagnosed with diabetes, asthma, bone loss, etc. And you can see some of the snapshots. And then we have important lifestyle factors that we've asked questions about. You know, are you currently or a former smoker? How much are you a current drinker? Obesity, and are you overweight? And again, just some snapshots. In total, there are about 500 questions from this health and exposure survey. So really only giving you a sneak peek at just a few of those. Next slide. The other two surveys are what we call our exposome surveys, an internal and external exposome. So the external exposome survey goes into much further depth on your external environmental exposures. So what have you been exposed to in your occupation? Detailed information about your residences and their conditions. And so again, just some snapshots, right? Have you been exposed to solvents and degreasers occupationally? Is your home regularly treated with insecticides or pesticides? Do you live within 1 mile of a gas station or power lines of a farm, right? Of these sort of environmentally important sort of entities near your home? Do you have pets exposed to carcinogens, etc.? And then the internal exposome, next slide, please. Asks questions, again, over 700 questions about things like lifestyle, activity, sleep, important components of sort of the internal exposome. Again, we've got some snapshots about questionnaires related to sleep, about exercise and how common and frequently you exercise, diet and food, things like blood type, and then importantly, what medications are participants taking here. All important parts of sort of, again, the external and internal exposome that we know interacts to play an important role in human health. Next slide. We've also used the address data that participants have provided. So both addresses while you've been enrolled in PEGS, as well as addresses that came from the survey questionnaires. In particular, we asked questions about your longest lived childhood and longest lived adult address. And we are using those addresses to get geospatial estimates of exposure. There's a lot of data out there publicly at the local, national, and international level on things like air pollution that we can link sort of your estimated air pollution exposure at a particular address over a particular amount of time. And we are working to add additional data layers using this address data. So we've collected data about air quality, about temperature, about sort of structural vulnerabilities as well. And again, an exciting growing set of data streams to estimate exposure. Next slide. I'll send it back to Jan.
Yeah. So one of the things that we are hoping to do with PEGS is to use a precision medicine kind of framework, but to think about how the environment fits into this. And what we've called this is precision environmental health, because in fact, we're interested not only in the things that increase our risks of certain kinds of conditions, but we're also really interested as well in the kinds of things that reduce our risks, like green space, as I mentioned. So what's this all about? So in a precision medicine kind of framework, what's being done now is to really understand a given individual and try to tailor a medication to that specific individual and their genes. But precision environmental health actually is much broader. But the basic understanding or the basic goal is still the same. And that's to understand individual risk by integrating lots of levels of different factors, some of the ones that you've just heard about, that measure exposures. And this can be called exposomics, or to provide evidence of their effects. And some of you may have heard about epigenetics, metabolomics, microbiome. These are kinds of investigations that can be done to see, to relate a specific exposure to a biological process. And that's incredibly important for us to understand which exposures are doing bad things and which exposures are doing good things. So together, we want to be able to understand the environment, health conditions, and genetics, and to really pull all of those three things together. The reason that we want to do this is not just because it's interesting from a scientific perspective, but the point really is to reduce exposures or ameliorate their effects. So to screen for, block, or slow progression. So for something like some subclinical diabetes, are there things other than losing weight that you can actually do to change your environment and change how that might progress? And finally, to reduce morbidity, which is really the negative effects on the body, or mortality, of course, when we have known diseases. So this is a goal. And I think we're beginning to get ever closer to that. Next slide. So this is really just, again, a snapshot of where we're going with this. So over on the left, you'll see the genotype, and we have sequencing and genetic information on over 5,000 people in our cohort, all of whom have agreed to provide this information. And we also now have epigenetic data and are increasingly being able to add depth to this information. So in terms of phenotype, so that's the phenotype is what you look like. And it includes broadly what you look like. So your self-reported diseases and health conditions. At the moment, we have these from the questionnaires that our participants have filled out. And we also are working very hard with local healthcare systems. And I think very soon, for those of you who have consented, we will be able to pull that data together with all of the other data that we have to be able to really, really focus down on genes and health conditions and the environment. And in terms of the environment, again, so many of you have filled out the health and exposure survey and the external and internal exposome survey. And you saw some of the results of those that Allison presented. We have GIS data, so geospatial information system data. And we also have an ongoing, very active project in which we are calling back individuals, and I hope that some of you have been among those who have accepted to do this, to be able to gather other kinds of samples. So blood samples, hair samples that give us an idea of your environmental exposures, urine samples that do the same thing. And these are becoming increasingly important as we try again to become much more precise in how we can pull together environment, genes, and our health conditions. I'm just going to make one point, and that is that our biosample project is one that is likely going to go on for several years. If you are interested in volunteering for that, that would be great. If you are interested, but we also may not have got to you in terms of our list because we can only really handle so many people at once. But it's really a wonderful opportunity, and we're so thankful to the people that have already volunteered their time and their samples. Next slide.
So now I'm going to talk a little, Jan's giving a great overview of where we're going. Are y'all hearing feedback? Okay.
Okay.
All right, thank you, sorry. I wanted to make sure you could hear. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the specific studies that we've done with this data. Like I said, Jan mentioned where we're going in the big picture, but want to highlight a few example studies that we want everybody to be aware of. So one recent study was really looking at immune-mediated diseases from our PEGS participants, and how sort of immune-mediated diseases are associated with both genes and environmental exposures. Here we looked at the exposure of interest was proximity to a commercial animal feeding operation, sometimes known as a CAFO, where we can show that sort of the closer the proximity to a CAFO exposure, the higher the odds of having an immune-mediated disease. And we also wanted to look at how that environmental exposure interacts with people's genetic variation. So we looked at candidate genes that had come up in studies trying to understand the genetics of immune-mediated diseases, and we're able to find a very strong gene-environment interaction, that your sort of change in odds of having an immune-mediated disease, whether it's one in particular or any at all, really changes as your distance to that exposure changes, and is mediated very strongly by your genotype. So showing that it's both genes and environment that sort of lead to that accumulated risk. Next slide. In another study, this one really geared towards precision environmental health kind of goals, we looked at sort of diabetes in the PEGS participants. So diabetes is an extremely common disease in the PEGS population, just as it is the US population in general. And there are a number of known genetic risk factors. And a lot of people in the field are interested in what are called polygenic scores for diabetes risk. So looking across your genome, what's the overall genetic susceptibility to diabetes? In our study, knowing that environment is I'll say more important in understanding your risk of diabetes, we did a study with this data where we were able to look at those polygenic scores based on the genome for participants that provided whole genome sequencing versus building a poly-exposure score. So looking across those questionnaires, which one would actually be more predictive in understanding risk. And we show that a poly-exposure score is much more predictive and informative for diabetes than polygenic, and that poly-exposure scores were always added value to any other type of data that you might be using for prediction. So even if you've got clinical factors like, are you actually pre-diabetic? Things like BMI, really well-established clinical factors, adding these poly-exposure scores really increases sort of the predictive modeling there, which hopefully downstream can lead to things like individualized screening and individualized prevention sorts of efforts. Next slide. Another great example of a study that's been done with all the participant data is looking at autoimmune skin disorders and air pollution. Had some really great work done looking at sort of air pollution as a mixture. Right, air pollution doesn't just have one type of particle in it. There are different particulate matter in the air. So use the address data from PEGS to link to not just overall estimates of air pollution, but really breaking down to individual components that are in the air, and showed really strong associations of sort of that mixtures effect with the risk of psoriasis and or eczema in the PEGS study. Next slide. So here we'll stop, and I'm going to go on and sort of let you know we're going to be asking for feedback. So I'd really like to know what are some of your preferences in particularly how we engage you all in this study. Next slide. Oh, sorry, go back. Yeah. So I'll talk a little bit later about a participant board, but we're really going to ask for input on how you guys would like to engage, how commonly you would like to be recontacted, what mode would you like to be recontacted with, and I'll come back to some of those after Jan talks about some of the remediation. sorts of pot.
Oh, thanks, Allison. So there are many things in the environment that a lot of us have heard about. But I wanted to give you just a little bit of information on the kinds of health conditions that some of these are associated with. And then we'll move into maybe what we can also do about those. So in terms of pesticides, pesticides have lots of warnings on them, and those are real warnings that we should be taking pretty seriously in terms of how we use them. Pesticides have been associated with increased risks of Parkinson's disease, of increased risks of birth defects, and also with increased risks of reproductive disorders. Now, nonstick pots and pans are something that we love. I mean, it just has made our lives so much easier. But there are certain kinds of nonstick pots and pans that are really pretty bad for us. And particularly when those get older and the substance that allows them not to be sticky begins to come off. And these have been associated with testicular cancer, with thyroid cancer, and with kidney cancer. So again, something really important for us to think about. In the South, mold is almost impossible not to be exposed to. And mold is associated with allergies, with asthma, and with other respiratory diseases in particular. Lead pipes. We've heard a lot about this. We know a lot about this in terms of the paint in our house. And while there have been major remediations done for really getting that lead-based paint out of our homes, we still have lead pipes. And lead from pipes has been associated, or lead pipes themselves rather, have been associated with cardiovascular diseases, with cognitive decline, as well as with kidney failure. And finally, plastics. Plastics are everywhere. They're an incredibly important part of our lives and have made our lives so much easier in so many ways. But there are downsides of certain kinds of plastics: impaired immunity, endocrine disruption, and insulin resistance, which can lead to diabetes. Next slide. So in our PEGS population, almost 15% of our respondents have reported visible mold in their residence in the past year. About the same percent report that they apply pest control chemicals every 2 or 3 months. And again, a relatively large number report that they do not know if they've been occupationally exposed to the plastic production compound called BPA. Next slide. But there are some things that we can do about this. So in terms of lead, it's important to minimize your risk by running water from the tap before drinking or cooking to flush your pipes. Because water that's been sitting in the pipes tends to be able to accumulate the lead itself. It's also really good to know, if it's at all possible, whether you do have lead in your own pipes. It's important to keep painted surfaces in good condition to minimize deterioration if your home in particular was built before 1978. In terms of mold, ventilate your shower, your laundry, and your cooking areas to control humidity levels. Use a dehumidifier if humidity levels remain high. And this can, again, be really important in the part of the country in which we live. And also you want to make sure that you fix leaky roofs, windows, and pipes so that dampness doesn't accumulate, which absolutely attracts mold. Next slide. As far as pesticides and insecticides, you want to close your windows and doors when spraying pesticides outside. Some of these things seem so incredibly obvious, but we forget to do them. You want to read and follow instructions on product label, and you're not going to want to use more than is absolutely necessary. And of course, store out of the reach of children. Next slide. So endocrine disrupting chemicals are something that has received a lot of attention. And as an endocrinologist, this is something that is really important to me and to the people and my colleagues in the field, but it should also be important to everyone. Endocrine disrupting chemicals are natural or man-made chemicals that can interfere with your hormones. There are a couple of things. So per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, please don't remember that because it's PFAS, also known as forever chemicals, are found in firefighting foam, nonstick pans, papers, and textiles. Phthalates or plasticizers are found in food packaging, cosmetics, and they're present everywhere. Bisphenol A or BPA, as I mentioned before, that's also been used to make plastics and epoxy resins. And finally, polybrominated diphenyl esters or PBDE are present in flame retardants as well as in furniture and carpet. We contact these in the air and in water and in food. Next slide. So all of this sounds pretty scary, and in some ways it actually is, but there are things that we can actually do on a day-to-day basis that can really help to ameliorate the risks from some of these things that are just so present in our environment. You want to avoid heating foods in plastic containers. Use metal or glass water bottles. And there's several reasons for that. One of those is the risk to us all of using plastic bottles, but the other is the incredible buildup of plastic waste in our environment that then becomes a part of our whole ecosystem. You want to use water filters, and that's really helpful, either below your sink or in your refrigerator or someplace else in your home. And the ones that are really good are the ones that are activated carbon or reverse osmosis types of water filters. Fragrance-free cosmetics and soaps, again, are something that can be easily switched to. Make sure that you open your windows. Household dust can contain EDCs, and there are some situations in which you may want to use air filters in your home, particularly if you have people with asthma or children that are particularly susceptible. You also want to think about not asking for paper receipts, but just asking for digital receipts, because some of these are in the printing, the print that is on those receipts. And finally, you want to avoid vinyl products such as flooring or shower curtains. One of the things that has actually become more prevalent in Europe, actually, than it is yet in the United States are different regulations that are trying to curb some of the production of some of the things that we've been talking about. And I think that that has had huge differences in the areas of Europe that really were inundated with really bad things from the environment that affect our health. Next slide.
So as I previewed before, we want you guys' help and input as we move forward with this study. So we want your input. And particularly if you go to next slide. But particularly, we would love to ask for volunteers to join our PEGS Participant Advisory Board. So the advisory board was created to work collaboratively with the study team and PEGS participants. Your insight is crucial to how we think about what questions and studies might be of the highest translational impact and of the most interest, specifically in service of the participants that are so willing to share this crucial data. So we're hoping Participant Advisory Board can help serve as a liaison between the study team and the cohort by sharing research needs, suggestions. You guys know what you're exposed to at home and what is impacting your health more than we do. So providing that input will be crucial for our future research directions. We also want your help in developing goals and objectives centered around sort of this cohort and this data set that will positively impact you all through study participation and in sort of advanced science. We want your feedback on study materials and activities. This can be things like how often you would like to be recontacted, what format you would prefer that we use for that recontact. Do you prefer text messages or emails or all of the above, and different options to reach out, as well as ideas for how best to inform participants of what all is going on, right? We're so excited to share sort of the results of the studies that you all have empowered and enabled. So we want to make sure we're getting that information to you as often and in your preferred formats. Next slide. I said, so if you are interested in engaging with us as a member of the advisory board, please reach out. Let us know. We would appreciate that effort so much. Please shoot us an email at this PEG's email alias if you are interested. So it's listed here. You also can find this on our website if you're forgetting it here and want to look at sort of the web presence that we have. But if you're interested, please reach out, let us know. If you've already contacted us that you are interested, look for information later this year about an upcoming meeting that we're working to schedule. So please, your input and feedback is just absolutely invaluable to us. And we are so grateful for the level of engagement that we get with participants. Next slide. I think we'll end here in the planned presentation. We've got time for questions. This is a QR code to take you to the PEG's NIEHS website. Also, if you just Google those two terms, it'll get you right there really easily as well. Next slide. We're switching off here. Jan, I'll hand it back over to you.
So thanks so much, Allison. I want to really take the next little part of time to answer some of the questions that have come into the Q&A. Jen Emerson, who is one of the incredible people that works with us, one of a very large number of incredible people that work with us, is going to moderate this for us.
Yes. Thanks. We did get one request. If we could show the first slide again that had the environmental information on it. People were interested in seeing that a little bit more. Aside from that, the first question is from a participant that gave their DNA sample quite a long time ago, about 25 years ago. How is that sample still helping?
So first of all, thank you incredibly. For those of you who have agreed to genome sequencing, and that was in fact a separate consent that went out several years ago, we have been able to do that sequencing in 5,000 people approximately, and that has just been incredibly important because what it allows us to do is to actually put together the genetic information with the environmental information and health conditions. This is something that we have made really incredible strides in, and Allison mentioned the one study relating to distance to commercial animal feeding operations and how that has its own risks, but has even greater risks when associated with specific genetic profiles. But there are other things that can actually be understood from DNA, and that includes epigenetics. And just to very, I think, quickly summarize what that is, our genes are what we're born with. But epigenetics are really changes that happen to our genes that can in fact change the function of our genes based on our exposures over life. And so that has become something that's really important because, again, what this does is it says, okay, we know that people are exposed to certain things, but what kinds of things are really happening in our body that leads our bodies to either adapt or not to adapt to the things that we're exposed to. So those things are incredibly important things. And for those of you who haven't agreed to genome sequencing, first of all, you're very welcome to contact us and give your consent. But the other part of it is that we also know how important this information is, and there are much simpler ways. There are simpler ways that we are trying to get funding to be able to complete so that we've got a much larger number of people whose DNA can be used. And what that means is that sort of in these kinds of studies, the bigger the numbers we deal with, the more likely we are to find things. And at the moment, we can look at, for instance, some of the most common diseases, but maybe we can't look at some of the less common diseases because we don't have quite enough people who have given us the information that actually have those. So hopefully, in the next couple of years, we're going to be able to get the funding that will allow us to do that. I think that's it. Allison, did you have anything else to add?
I think that's a great summary. Maybe you can just add a technical note. So you mentioned how long ago that DNA was donated. DNA is remarkably stable. It's amazingly stable. So that just because your samples were collected earlier in time doesn't mean they're any less valuable in sort of getting that genetic data.
The next question is this study just in North Carolina? If not, what are the other sites?
So it is just in North Carolina. It's a North Carolina specific sample, and all of the initial recruitment was done in North Carolina. And so that has lots of advantages because it lets those of us who live here know what's going on, or those who have lived here previously. But it also has disadvantages because it doesn't give us a whole snapshot of what's going on across the country or across the world. But one of the things that we are very excited about is that there's a much larger study that is going to be recruiting 1 million people, and it's called All of Us. And All of Us has become very excited about collecting environmental data. This is not something that was part of some of their initial work, but it is part of that now. And our study, PEGS, and all of you have in fact informed All of Us about how to collect the data, how to do some of the analyses that require a lot of complexity that Allison and her group are really expert at doing. So we're excited that we really can be in many ways an incubator for understanding some of these things, or our studies can be a prototype that larger studies can use. One of the things that's a real advantage of our cohort is that it's pretty diverse. And we have presented some of this data before, but we have 60% women, and we have about
28%.
I'm sorry?
28%.
28. I was going to say about 30% non-Caucasian population in our population. So compared to a lot of studies, like one that's being done in the United Kingdom, that's called the UK Biobank, even though they're larger, we're way more diverse population. And that's incredible because the information that we get isn't just relevant to white people. It should be relevant to everybody. And where there are different kinds of risks for different kinds of groups, we need to know about that. And our study gives us really a little bit of a snapshot into at least beginning to understand how to analyze that data. And I think that's a really exciting part of what we're doing. Sorry, my answers are too long.
And I'll add, we've got really diverse, we've got participants in 99 out of the 100 counties in North Carolina. So we also have a lot of environmental diversity with that sort of very broad coverage of North Carolina as a whole.
Yeah, and also education level and income level. So again, we're just so happy for all of the people that have participated, and we are continuing to recruit if you have others who you think might be interested.
Okay, thanks. The next question is, have PEG studies looked at radon exposures?
We have not yet specifically, but radon exposure is on our list of geospatial estimates that we need to link and work towards. It's a very important area. And like I said, you guys highlighting those things can help. If we know it's at the top of your mind, we can help make that at the top of ours as well.
Yeah, it's really important.
Is PEG's published data being used to impact policies around the use of harmful chemicals?
I think everything that it's really hard to figure out how to influence policy. And NIEHS is very much in the business of really trying to provide the data and the science that allows that to happen. We're not policymakers, but I think the information that we provide is information that can be used. And one of the things that's actually been really interesting is that the director of our institute, Rick Wojcik, as well as our institute in general, has been very interested in environmental justice. There was a recent town hall that was held in Mebane, I think, and that brought together people from NIEHS, but also from the federal government and the agencies, people that actually do make policies, as well as state government. And that was something that was really important. And it brought them together with people from the community and the community leaders. Those kinds of links are things that we can really try to broker or facilitate, in addition to the scientific information that we can provide. So we've had a recent really wonderful example of how that has really got the attention of people that really weren't paying attention before, and has also showed and has also given them an impetus to really begin to work together to make policy change.
Great. Has anything been done to coordinate work with the EPA and exposure modeling that they have done?
So I'll tag in here. The EPA provides incredible resources, both in their geospatial estimates of exposure, where we have connected with some of the EPA's resources most immediately are in our estimates of air pollution. So the data that we actually link comes from the EPA and actually from consensus and sort of committee-based modeling efforts that the EPA leads. So we've used sort of their expertise in estimating sort of air pollution, most specifically. That one comes the most immediately to mind, but certainly they provide a lot of resources for exposure estimates, and there are sort of particular collaborations that come in and out as needed for certain studies.
When a person is exposed to significant amounts of pollution in groundwater or otherwise during prenatal or the first 3 years of life, are these exposures showing up in their genes?
Generally not in their genes per se, but in these epigenetic markers that, I mean, for the most part, unless it's a really incredible toxic spill, we don't have really kind of genetically, we don't have the kinds of real genetic disorders that come from that. But we do know that those can occur with high doses. And though we have a number of examples of that through chemical spills in Italy, from the use of certain endocrine disruptors actually in the United States in the 1970s. And so those things can in fact happen either in terms of our genes or in terms of the epigenetic factors. And these epigenetic changes will have been associated with the hormones, for instance, from the 1970s, that has been shown to be associated with a different shape of a uterus, which means that it's really not compatible for a normal pregnancy, and have also been associated with an increased risk of cervical cancer in the children, the female children of those. But more importantly, I think are the fact that prenatal exposures, or not prenatal exposures, but fetal exposures to some chemicals have been associated with things like later obesity and later diabetes. Again, really common things in our environment. So this is a whole field actually that's been called the developmental origins of human disease, or DOHAD. And there's quite a lot of information on it, but it's an incredibly important question. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I think we've answered all of the questions that have been, oh, actually, so we just got a new one in. Would you like to get siblings to join in the study as well? Is there any age limitation on recruiting new participants?
Well, at the moment, first of all, we'd love to have everybody. Anybody and everybody that you know that might be at all interested in trying to understand how our environment affects our health and how that works with our genes to affect our health. Because the more people we have in this study, the more sure we are of the information that is coming from the analyses. So absolutely siblings, they are terrific, as are all your friends and neighbors and anybody you meet in the grocery store. No, I was kind of serious. Anyway, the lower limit though at the moment is 18. So we are not at the moment recruiting children for this study, but we are actively recruiting anybody that's 18 and over. And it doesn't matter how old you are or how young you are. And I think one of the things that's been really incredible about this study is that because of how wonderful the participants have been about providing their ongoing contact information, we actually have a lot of information now on people that joined the study, and our huge recruitment efforts were between about 2008 and 2010. So we've got a lot of longitudinal information as well as more recent information from those who are joining, and that's also amazingly important.
Thanks. That has answered all the questions we've received. We did get a couple of comments from folks wanting to join the participant advisory board. So I've put our phone number and email into the chat. So please just reach out and let us know.
And thank you for that. And I think there's one question that maybe we missed, and that was the risk of commercially bottled water as an individual serving. And I do have to say we haven't quite got down to that kind of precision in terms of an individual serving. But what we know is that the plastics used for bottled water, which I know we all love because it's made our lives so much simpler in many ways, or it did. But now we have all sorts of other ways of drinking water. It's just so much everywhere. And I think that that what we would get from a single serving, serving 8-ounce bottle of water is pretty minimal compared to all the other exposures that we have and to the volume of waste that, again, as I mentioned, can get into our landfill sites and into our water systems and into our soil. So we don't have that precision, but I think it's still a really important thing to think about. Every little bit helps. And with that, I think that unless there are any more questions, I want to thank you for your attention. I want to thank those of you who have been with us for an incredibly long time, as well as those of us who have been with us for an even short time, and for those who have joined recently and those who have agreed to come back for our biosample collection protocol. I just can't thank you enough, as well as all of the people that work to support this study at NIEHS. So thanks again for your participation, and thanks for your advocacy in general for a cleaner environment that's helpful for all of us. And I think we'll close there.
I'll echo Jane's thanks. Thank you all.